Good morning, everyone. Welcome to, what day is today? Wednesday? How are we doing?
Is it Wednesday?
I think so, isn't it? It is Wednesday.
It's Monday.
It's like, that's bad?
Yes.
Why?
Wednesday
You
is-
thought it was Thursday?
This is the worst, you know.
No, I thought it
It's
was
in the
Wednesday.
middle of the week,
Oh.
not close to the weekend.
Oh, it's too far. Okay.
Yeah, so much good idea.
No, it's still going.
Oh, it's still going?
Yeah.
It's.
But that was Tuesday.
You thought it was Tuesday?
Yeah.
Oh, but this is good, isn't it?
No.
Oh, it's going too fast.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Okay. Right? Weeks are either going too slow or too fast, or we're too far from the weekend, or we're equidistant from either last weekend or this weekend. What a mess, eh?
Next week is final week.
Next week is pretty much the final week of class, and then we're gonna go into presentations for the last week. So I've gotta do some math and figure it out. We may need. I'm gonna figure out if we need 3 days for presentations or if we need 4. So we might have 1 day of class in the last week, or maybe a little bit more. I've just got to figure out.
What about 2 other quizzes?
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about that with you today as well, because we have 2 quizzes left. We can't do 2 quizzes.
We'll just cancel all the quizzes and
Yeah,
do
give
that.
us
You can
100.
focus the
Give us 100 marks
presentation.
for 2 quizzes.
Open book.
All
Still
the-
two
Okay.
quizzes, but open book.
Okay, I guess, okay, let's talk about this right now. Okay? So, yeah, we have 2 quizzes left. We cannot do both of them. Okay? So, I would still like to do one. I would like it to be, what's today? When should it be next week? What day?
Friday.
Next
Friday
next
week.
Friday?
Monday.
You can
Okay.
cover more. Yeah, so you can cover
This
more.
Monday?
Yeah.
No, Friday.
Yeah, you can cover more.
Next Monday.
Next Monday? No, next Monday is too far.
Yeah, it's too hard.
I'm okay with next Friday. Now, here's the question for you. So, we have 2 quizzes on the books. Each of them are worth 5%. So, we can do a few things. We can do one quiz that is normal size, and have it worth 5%, and then we can take that other 5% and put it somewhere else. Or we can have one more quiz that's a little bit bigger and have it worth 10%. Or some other suggestion. I'm open to options here.
Like, the other 5% that would go somewhere else, like an option.
Yeah.
Where would it go?
Where do you think is a good spot for it? Where could that 5% go?
Participation mark.
Yeah, I'd rather. I know where I know. I know what you're saying. I don't want to put it on the participation grade. I'd like to put it somewhere else. Possible.
But did we not get a grade for the museum assignment?
I kind of just gave you a mental credit for that one.
Oh, you could put it there.
I don't want to put it there because I don't really want to grade that one. I'd rather put it on something gradable.
We take time for that.
I know, and I'm glad. I took time too. It was a good experience, I think.
Yeah.
What about the option?
Huh?
What about the option?
Other options
Yeah.
for the 5%?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think? Give me some solutions here. What do you think is a good solution? I don't want to put on the final either because the final's already like a lot, and I don't want to make it like too heavy. It's already pretty heavy as it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it starts to get a little when final exams or projects go above 35%, they get a little scary. They're a little too heavy. Jen, do you have an idea? No?
I mean, the easier thing is just have a bigger example.
But you don't want a bigger one?
Too much.
Too much? Hmm. No, I don't. I had a suggestion for an open book. I don't want to do an open book exam. Also, you don't really want an open book exam from me because this is the trick about open book exams is that the more you have access to in an exam, the higher my expectations are going to be, right? So on a regular quiz, I know that all you've got is the stuff in your head, right? So I know that's where my expectation is. But if you had access to everything that we had done, well then my expectation is going to go up, right? Because yeah, you can just look up anything you need and write it down, right? That doesn't tell me anything that you know. I'm going to have to ask you more complicated questions. And so as the more you have to work with in an exam, the higher my expectations have to go. So I would suggest that you really don't want an open book exam because it's going to be a tougher exam. And to be honest, the most difficult exam I ever wrote in university was an open book exam. The teacher let us use all of our notes, all of the articles, and I wrote like a madman for the entire period, like the entire time of the exam. I wrote like crazy. I barely finished it, and I did okay. Never in my life do I want another open book exam because they are hellish. So I would say that you don't want that, and neither do I. I don't want that for you because I would have to make it quite difficult. Okay, so I know what I know what you're saying, but it's not workable. Kayla says, I think we shouldn't add more tasks because it's going to add up to the workload. I think that's true, and I think that's valid. How about this? This is a bit of a compromise. This is a little bit of you, a little bit of me. Next Friday we do the quiz, and it's worth 5%. It's a little bigger than what we've been doing. Not much, maybe like 7 or 8 questions. Okay? It's a little bit bigger. Now, that's for me. For you, I will take that 5% and I will put it on the quiz mark that is the highest.
Yes.
So whatever your highest quiz mark is will be worth 10% and the others will be worth 5. And I'll make this final quiz a little bit bigger than it normally is, but it'll still be worth 5. Unless it happens to be your highest mark, your highest quiz mark, and then it'll be 10. How do you feel about that?
Great.
Good compromise? A little bit of you, a little bit of me? I think that, does that work? Mike, does that work for you? Okay. Kang? Kwan, you okay? Little bit harder this time, but again, your highest quiz mark gets a bump up. Okay? All right. I think. What's that? I'll figure it out very shortly, and I'll post it in Microsoft Teams. I just want to look at where the break is. Yeah. So just to confirm, we're going to have a quiz next Friday. It will be a little bit bigger than it normally is, maybe like 8 questions. It'll be worth 5%, and then I will look at your 4 quiz marks, and the highest of those quiz marks will get that extra 5%. So it'll be worth 10% rather than 5. I'm getting the thumbs up in the back corner. Everybody okay there?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, and so I'll figure out the classes that are going to be part of that quiz. I'll post it on Teams, and you'll see that. Okay. Everybody okay? I swear to you, though, that open book exam was the worst. I've never written an open book. I've never written an open book exam before, and I hope I never do again. Because it was hell. And the other problem is that you had to use what was written, and you could copy things from what was written, but you had to know where it all was, right? Because you didn't have time to look for it. So if you wanted to cite, that thing you read in the article, you had to know where it was. Because if you didn't know where it was, you didn't have enough time to look for it to write it down. And so it was it was the worst experience. He was a great teacher, the teacher of this class, but it was just horrendous. Just horrendous. Okay. Yeah, never again. Never again. Okay. So I'll figure that out, and Kayla, I'll figure out the topics. I won't make the quiz will be a little bigger, but I won't make it, ridiculously large. Like there's no point in saying that we don't have enough time to do 2 quizzes and then just trying to make like one quiz the same. Like, so I'll be reasonable, but yeah. Okay. Good. I'm glad we resolved that. Let's move on, or move back to. So yesterday we were talking a little bit about Indigenous myth and story, and we talked a little bit about shamans and animism, and so on. I'll tell you about the potlatch here very shortly, but we said that myths were important, right? They were used to help justify religious belief, but they also help people to explain the world around them, to pass on values and beliefs and morals, and sometimes they're entertaining as well, right? And we saw a little story yesterday, which I think was kind of entertaining. I think it was all right. I'm just going to jump through that. Yeah, so we said that this story was a bit of a creation story, and that it told us a little bit about how the world came to be the way it is, right? Where does the sun come from? Where does the moon come from? Where do the stars come from? All of those things are kind of explained in the story of the raven, right? Actually, I was telling another thing that you may know about myths is that there's often lots of versions of them, right? So they all differ a little bit, and I told Sarah yesterday that we were talking about this story of Raven stealing the light, and she said, "Oh, is that the one where, we learn why the raven sounds so hoarse, right? They don't really sound nice. They're like ah, right?" And she heard a version of the story whereby the raven, I think, escaped with the light and flew up the chimney where the fire smoke was coming up. And so as it flew up, the smoke kind of got in its lungs and caused it to be really hoarse. And that's why the raven sounds the way it does, because of the fire smoke as it was escaping the house with the light. And so, again, these myths have kind of different versions, and sometimes, there are extra details worked in, right? What did we say was kind of maybe a lesson or a moral of that story? What were we supposed to learn from it? We didn't learn anything from our cultural teachings. Huh? Oh yeah. If you're pregnant and there's no father around, be suspicious. What's that? Right. So yeah, in the story, the character of Skyfather is being very selfish, right? How's he being selfish? He's taken all the light, right? Everyone is stumbling around in complete darkness because he has hoarded all of the light. How else is he being selfish? Yeah, his daughter wants to find a man to marry, but he's afraid of losing her, right? And so he keeps the light because he wants it, but also because it prevents his daughter from going out into the world and finding someone else, right? So yeah, he's being kind of doubly selfish, right?
That's funny. The most funny thing is the daughter said, I want to get married. I want to find a husband. No reason.
No,
He said, I want to find a husband. That's it.
That's-
I want like because I want to find a husband.
there's no like backstory or why she wants to find a husband.
Yeah, no, no, no.
Yeah.
She just want to say, I want to find one.
She's too desperate to find a husband.
You think she's too desperate?
Yeah, she's single.
A long time.
You think she should just like be out there living her best life?
Change the
Just never mind. Apparently she can, you know, if she wants to have a kid, she's got a raven boy. Actually, well, no, I think he turns back into Raven. So after when the story's over, she doesn't have a kid anymore because he was the baby was actually Raven, right? So he turns into the pine needle. He goes inside her. He's born. He grows up a little bit, and then he transforms and flies away. So I don't think she has a kid at the end of this story, if I understand correctly. But even so, yeah, it's not a fully developed, it's not a fully developed novel, right? It's a little myth. But yeah, Skyfather's being very selfish, right? And of course, Raven is too, right? Because Raven kind of steals the light for his own purposes, and one of his purposes is he wants to play tricks on humans, which is not very cool, right? But then, such is the nature of Raven, right? He's a trickster figure, right? He likes to cause mischief and trouble and try to trip people up and create chaos, and that's his job in myth, right? And again, basically every culture has mythological stories that contain trickster figures, right? Sometimes it's Raven, sometimes it's Coyote, sometimes it's Loki, right? But either way, these are characters that usually create some form of chaos, right? They're unpredictable. They're not really good guys. They're not really bad guys either. They just kind of do what they want. There's actually a really good and funny book called Coyote Blue by, oh gosh, I'm going to forget his, Christopher Pike, I think his name is. Great novel about a guy who's just living his, he's just living his life, just living his normal life. And then Coyote, the indigenous trickster figure, kind of shows up and starts hanging out in his life and causing him trouble. So this kind of supernatural creature just kind of shows up and starts messing up his life. It's kind of funny. It's a good read if you're interested in that sort of thing. Actually, a few of his novels are good, but anyway, I won't get into that. Yeah, so these kind of creation myths, this is just one of them, right? Because, of course, the world is full of things that need to be explained, and Indigenous people have lots of different stories that explain why things are the way they are, right? And the stories kind of tell us about how the landscape was created, where the world comes from, how men and women were created, and what's their purpose. All Indigenous groups have stories like this, right? And think about the fact that we said that when Europeans came to Canada or came to North America, there was probably 300 or 400 different languages spoken in Canada alone, Indigenous languages. So think of how many stories that is, right? And they all wouldn't have been the same, right? They would have been either slightly different or very different. Think how many stories there were that maybe we don't know anymore, right? Thousands and thousands of stories that people told about the landscape they were living in and how people got to be there and what we should do in our lives. A huge volume of stories that are for the most part gone, right? It's kind of sad. Yeah, so In some cases, anthropologists are working very hard to try to preserve these stories because, again, most of them are passed on orally, right? They're said to people generation after generation, and anthropologists are trying to record them, right, and make sure that we have a record of them. And similarly, anthropologists and Indigenous people are working hard to preserve language, right? Because Indigenous languages are disappearing. There's very few people who speak these languages anymore. And yeah, they're in danger of disappearing as well, especially since most of them aren't written or weren't written down either. Actually, I just saw an article where was it? It was in the Atlantic about, in an effort to preserve Navajo, which is a indigenous culture group and language from kind of southwestern United States, so like Nevada, New Mexico kind of area. They're actually dubbing movies in Navajo. So they were talking about like an old Western, and they had done the full dubbing in Navajo to help people learn it and continue to speak it. So lots of work is going on to help try to preserve these stories and these languages, right? Because those are an important part of what culture is. Okie dokie. I'm going to jump just ahead to, the last thing I want to talk about. This is an important thing for Indigenous people here on the West Coast. Okay, so it doesn't happen in other places of Canada. Potlatch is kind of a West Coast phenomenon. And what you see here is a potlatch that's happening in one of those big cedar houses that I showed you pictures of. This is kind of at the back of the house where they have, I don't know if you would call it a stage. That's not quite right. But I don't know if you'd call it an altar either, because that's not quite right. But it's something like both of those. Okay, so it's a place, it's a focal point for dancing and ceremony and ritual. Okay, so I don't know what word is best. But here you can see people engaging in a potlatch. Okay, and potlatch, what it is it's basically a gift exchange, but it's a big deal, and it serves a number of functions in Indigenous culture here on the West Coast. Okay, so the sort of main point of potlatch is giving. Okay, not so much the receiving, but the giving. Okay, and the more you can give, the more kind of things you can give away to the more people, the more people will respect you, right? The more status and honor and prestige you have, right? So again, it's very different from kind of modern European society. We tend to look up to and, idolize people who have a lot of money, right? Elon Musk is kind of the hero of many people because he's so rich and so innovative. Indigenous people probably wouldn't think he's so great because these Indigenous people value giving, right, and generosity. It's not how much he has, it's how much can he give away, right? And so these potlatches were gift exchanges, but they were also a very showy way for important men in the community to give away as much as they possibly could, right? And as you can see, even to the point of destroying things, right? So to show that, look at this, I'm giving all this stuff away, I'm going to burn this stuff because I don't need it. I'm so unattached to possessions, right? And so they're kind of a big deal. And they're what anthropologists would call a total social phenomenon. Okay? So this is an event or a ritual or something that happens that has religious significance and social significance and economic significance. Right? So all of these pieces of culture are tied together. Culture is integrated, if you will, because we said that several weeks ago, right? Culture is integrated. Here it is, right? It's a religious, mythological thing, right? So there are religious rituals that go with this. There are dances. The gods are spoken to and referenced in the potlatch. It's economic, right? Because the chiefs will gather together as much stuff as they can and then give it all away, right? So some people will be giving, many other people will be receiving these gifts, right? There's an economic exchange happening. And it's a social thing as well, right? Families and tribes and clans are getting together. People are talking and reconnecting. Sometimes marriages are happening at the same time. And so you've got this kind of social and economic and religious thing happening all at the same time. And it's a big deal, right? The potlatch is a big deal. And, you shouldn't, it's not Christmas, okay? It's not Christmas. It's not, we shouldn't think of this as like, Indigenous Christmas, because it's not what it is. But Christmas is something that's also a total social phenomenon, right? So if we celebrate Christmas, yes, we get together with our family and our friends, right? We reconnect with these people and spend time with them. Yes, it's economic, right? We spend money on gifts and we wrap them up and we give them to people. And in some cases, for some of us, it's a religious thing as well, right? It commemorates the birth of Jesus if you're a Christian. And so you might, find yourself going to church and remembering, your faith and the birth of Jesus and what that means. So in a similar way, Christmas is a total social phenomenon, just like the potlatch is. But it's not Indigenous Christmas, but they are similar in that way, right? Is that they kind of connect all of those parts of culture. And they're a big deal, right? Christmas, if you're someone who celebrates Christmas, it's kind of a big deal, right? Kind of a big deal. So for Indigenous people too, the potlatch is kind of a big deal. And again, it's all about giving and about status and honor, right? So the sort of biggest people in the community, the most important men, and they're men, I should just say men because they are men. The most important men in the community are basically trying to outdo each other, right? They're trying to gain more status than the other guy, right? They're trying to they're trying to appear cooler, right? And so, rather than, get more money or drive a nicer car or have a nicer house, these guys are trying to publicly shame the other chiefs, right? You gave away that much at your potlatch, look how much I'm giving away. It's way more, right? So, right? It's a challenge, right? So it's a generous thing, but it's competition, right? It's guys trying to outdo each other, which I think we all know guys sometimes try to do, right? We try to outdo one another in various ways. This is how they do it. But of course it benefits the community, right? The more these guys can give away, the more the community has to share in, right? So it's not about, holding on to what you have. It's about giving everything you can in order to shame the other guy, right? So that next time he has to give away even more than you, right? Because he's got to show you up, right? You think you're better than me? You think you can give away more than me? You just watch. My next potlatch, you're going to cry, right? So, and that's kind of how it goes, right? These guys are trying to outdo each other. But again, the entire community can benefit because they receive this stuff, right? Stuff that they need. Yeah, and so if you go to a potlatch, chances are you'll be given something, okay? And so the chief will normally give things out according to rank and status. So the most important people will be given things first. People who are lower status will be given something later. And again, if you're given something, you really can't say no, right? Because you're sort of you know, you would be losing dignity, right? People expect you to graciously accept the gift, but also to repay it, right? It's your job when you receive a gift. Often there's an obligation to repay, right? If somebody gives you a birthday present, when their birthday comes around, it's kind of like you should probably get something for them, right? Kinda, yeah. So it's the same thing here. If somebody gives you a gift at Potlatch, you know that you're going to have to give them something in return, right? Not at a, you don't have to do your own potlatch or anything, but that gift should be repaid, right? And as you can see, it might even, you might even be expected to pay back more than you were given, right? So you can see how, you know, people are constantly trying to give more and more and more, which increases production, but it also makes sure that everybody gets everything that they need, right? People are not holding on to what they have, right? People are not just collecting enough food for themselves and saying, screw all you guys, right? They're, you know, gaining respect and acceptance in the community by giving, right? And you know that you have to collect food, or you have to weave hats or weave blankets, and you have to not only do them for yourself, but you have to make more so that you can give, right? And so again, everyone is going to benefit from this drive to not accumulate more for themselves, but have enough to give away, right? Because that's what the community, that's what people will respect, right? You'll be part of the community if you give, right? And if you don't, you'll lose dignity, right? You'll lose face. People won't respect you as much, right? They'll kind of maybe not talk to you, or kind of like roll their eyes when they see you. It's like, oh, here comes the person who doesn't share. What's that? Is it like?
In the very beginning of the semester, we talk about the gift.
Oh, the pigs. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a very similar system, right? In which people are encouraged to give, and the more you give, the more status you get. Very similar to the pig thing. Yeah. Yeah, and so I think I'll just skip over that. Okay. So, last thing we do before we leave First Nations behind is we want to review these kind of categories of knowledge like we always do, right? So I'm going to give you just 2 or 3 minutes to think about as many things that fit into these categories as you can, things that we've talked about. We'll kind of review them, and then we'll take a little break, okay? So I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock. Think of as many things that we've learned about as you can that fit into these categories. It's not long?
Yeah, it's not long. We just discussed it for about a week.
4 minutes. But that's it. Oh, I got 2.
It's another time, it's another contact. The BC First Nation.
You're
We
you're
didn't discuss
you're,
much.
you're burning time, Kenny. Uh-huh. Say that one more time. doesn't come up very much in like, every culture is going to have ways in which they deal with conflict, right? But we really don't come across a lot of good examples of how that works.
Like for example, if you for water to do this, and you to different answer. And these are those kind of conflicts. They have made the past.
Yeah. I mean, really the only, not the only thing, but one of the only things that come up was actually when I talked about black magic this week. That's conflict resolution. Right?
Yeah.
It's a way in which cultures resolve conflicts through this imagined thing called black magic. Right? But it really hasn't come up that often, which is, maybe it's something next time that I need to like specifically add in, because it just doesn't appear on its
But
own.
is there a lot of complex conflict resolution or
Well, every culture is going to have ways in which they resolve conflict, right? Between people.
I feel like around that time I don't think they even know that there is another culture that exists.
They definitely did, right? So, like here on the West Coast, there's, the people who lived around here were part of a larger kind of Coast Salish culture. The group that lived around here were called Musqueam. But they knew that, there was a different group of Coast Salish people living on the north, like on the, in North Vancouver and West Vancouver. They knew there were people further to the east of them and to the south. They kind of, they didn't know, they didn't know what Florida was, but I mean, they did know that there were other people around them, and they kind of knew what they were like, interacted with them. Sometimes I think we read there was some warfare, and they took slaves sometimes, so maybe that's a conflict kind of thing. So they did know, they knew there were other people around them. They didn't know, the big picture of it. But they knew there were other people, and especially on the West Coast, because there were more people here than there would have been in other parts of Canada, where people were more spread out. But yeah, it's definitely something that hasn't come up very often. Conflicts. Maybe I need to find something to see here.
There's a lot of instructions exchange. Well, there's a lot of instructions exchanges, but there's not much conflict.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of conflict, but not very much. You could talk about the role of shamans maybe in conflict resolution, although I kind of added that in. Well, it's more like shamans have a role in, mediating conflict between people. So that's part of their job.
The one that you just discussed.
Yeah. Yeah. So shamans are kind of like, they're like doctors and priests and like mental health counselors wrapped up into it.
I remember once we started
so they probably encountered each other. Right? We know that the Vikings came to America about 1,000 years ago, and they set up a small settlement in Canada. So they were here a long time ago. They probably encountered Indians. They talked to each other. I don't know if there's any evidence that they did. I don't really know, and I don't know how many Vikings actually moved over. Maybe very small. They were here, and then we definitely have archaeological findings. Right? I don't know that we really know why they were here, why they were here. Yeah, I think really what you would need, what you would need is you would need some evidence of people there. Right? So you would need like an arrow stuck in somebody's hair, or you would need, to see like an axe on the bone to say, oh yeah, this was clearly, this was not an accident. Somebody swung this at someone. Those kinds of, that kind of evidence is pretty common. I don't think we have any for the Vikings. But even in real life, I don't see it. I have seen one. Oh yeah. Yeah, I guess if you find huge quantities of weapons, then it's more credible. But you said Indigenous people had weapons in warfare. And again, Vikings could have brought their own weapons with them. The question is, did they use them? What? Yeah, I guess it'll. See what happens. But as far as I know, we're not going to shoot them. We know they were there. And very recently we have evidence that suggests that it's quite fine. I don't think that, the Vikings often came to sort of steal things, right? To steal people. I don't know if they steal. Maybe they took stuff. Yeah, I don't know that honestly. Why they came here. There's evidence they were here. For 500 years. But again, we don't. With no writing, who knows, right? Okay.
Time is well up. Tell me some things. Tell me some things about culture and environment with regard to Indigenous people in BC.
They, it's like not
Okay, so how does this, what does this have to do with environment?
They have different homes. They live in different homes.
It's what?
They live in different regions.
They live in different regions?
Yeah.
Okay.
They used to build stuff with the object from the environment.
Right. So the technology in this the technology in this kind of culture is is very based on very natural resources, right? So they're not making a lot of complex technology. They're not making glass. Many indigenous cultures aren't making ceramics even. There's very limited metalworking, a little bit, but not much. So most of the things that they're using for their clothing and their tools and other technology are very natural materials, right? Wood, stone, bark, grasses, shells, bone from animals, just kind of very basic raw materials, right, to create their technology. So that's true for sure. What else? Okay, so the climate sort of influences their settlement patterns, right? They're kind of all together in the winter, hanging out with each other, and in summer they're more dispersed, right? Very true. What else? What else? Culture and the environment.
Is there something to do with salmon?
Something to do with salmon? Maybe.
Like they know where when like the salmon starts to lay an egg,
Yeah.
the salmon will go back to the river and like they will start to hunt the salmon.
Right. So we know that they extensively used salmon, right? This resource of salmon, they used it quite a bit. They harvested as much salmon as they could get to store it away for the winter. They did this with other foods as well, right? Kind of collecting a lot of it and storing a lot of it. Yeah, for sure, right? So Harry says that the land provides for them, which is also very true, right? So all of us, of course, are reliant on the land, right? We take resources from the planet to make the things that we need, and indigenous people were no different, but they had a much more direct relationship with the land, right? Aryan says here they were taking care of their environments, and they also know how to use natural sources. Yeah, so they had, again, a more intimate connection with the land and with nature. They understood it in a very kind of complex way, and they did their best to use it for their own needs, but also to care for it at the same time, right? Because they were totally reliant on the natural world, right? I guess that's true, right? When there's no GMOs or kind of factory-based foods, then all of your food is organic and healthy, right? But very true, very true. Anything else? Culture and environment. Maybe we could say that that since the indigenous people believe in animism, many of those natural things in the natural world had spirits, right? They had a soul or a spirit, if you will. What about politics, power, authority, and governance? So Aryan says, okay, lots of celebrations, right? And so some of those would have to do with politics or power. What else?
They buy goods without tax.
What's that?
They buy things without taxes.
They buy things without tax? Oh, in modern days, not entirely true. There's they have a slightly, nowadays Indigenous people have slightly different tax benefits than non-Indigenous Canadians do. They still pay taxes. They have some exemptions and some things they can do, but also they still pay tax. Lots of people think they don't. They do. I was talking with Tafadzwa at the back before there. So these societies are kind of more simple, right? So Indigenous people live in societies that aren't as complex as, say, Egypt or Mesopotamia, right? So you don't need kind of a big, complicated state government like we saw in those places, right? Things are a little more simple here. We have chiefs that are in charge of clans and sort of villages. Sometimes they're in charge of access to certain parts of the land or resources, but they don't need a complicated state like some of these other civilizations did, right? So politics and power were a little more simple, right? The pyramid, the social hierarchy, well, it wasn't quite as tall, right? There were fewer levels of society, right? And people were probably more equal in societies like this than they were in ancient Egypt. What else? We just talked about Potlatch, right? Potlatch had a lot to do with politics and power, right? Because the sort of most important men in the community were trying to outdo each other, right? And give as much as they could to gain more power and prestige. So that has to do with it. What else? Harry says here that the powerful have a say in all matters to do with society and make laws that govern society. Yeah, and that would be true here as well, but in a more in a slightly more informal way, right? So it wouldn't be as formal as a regular state. I kind of feel like people are restless and want to take a break now. Do you want to do that?
Yes.
Okay. Let's take a break very quickly. We'll come back and finish this, and then we'll move on, okay? So I'm just feeling the restlessness. So let's take a quick break, and we'll finish this when we come back. Okay, and we're back doing our quick review of BC First Nations. Interactions and exchanges. What did we hear about?
Potlatch.
Right, Potlatch, huge exchange, very important in the culture of Indigenous people here on the Northwest Coast, right? That's important. What else? Yeah, right. There were people living here where Vancouver is. People were living here hundreds and thousands of years ago, and of course they were trading with people, different groups of people who are around them, right? So it's people living here. There was people living where North and West Vancouver are. There were people living further to the north, further to the east, down into the States. And yeah, there was some trade moving between those groups, and those groups kind of knew each other was there, right? So yeah, they interacted, they traded with each other. What else? Other interactions? We did read about that there was some warfare between groups, and sometimes they would take slaves from other groups, right? That's a sort of an exchange. You don't really get anything back in that kind of exchange. You just lose your people, but still, we could put that under that category. Conflicts and conflict resolution. The what? I can't hear you.
Black magic and shaman.
Oh yeah. The black magic thing that we talked about yesterday is kind of, even though it doesn't totally apply to Indigenous people in this part of the world, it is a way in which people resolve conflict within their society, right? It's a way to kind of repair relationships, right? And shamans, would have had that a similar job in Indigenous groups here. And I said something silly when I was talking to you, but I think it's not bad. You think of a shaman as kind of a part priest, right, and part doctor, part priest, and maybe part mental health therapist. They're kind of a little bit of everything, right, in an Indigenous group. Probably nothing else in conflict or conflict resolution, right? Some warfare sometimes, some taking of slaves. Probably, yeah, that might be it. Values and beliefs.
Spirits.
Spirits? What
Spiritual beings. Like they believe in spirits. They believe in their ancestor. Like that. They believe that there is a spirit world.
Right? There's a spirit world. Things in the natural world are animated, so they have spirits. The trees, the rocks, the river, the mountain, the animals. Right? All of these things have spirits that need to be respected. Right? What else?
Raven.
What about the raven?
Still the light.
He stole the light.
Yeah.
Okay. So they believe that Raven stole the light. Okay.
How the light come.
So they what?
The light
They
come.
believe in myths.
They believe in
Myths.
myths. Yeah, they have Indigenous cultures have a rich collection of myth. We heard one of probably hundreds of them. Yeah, so they've got lots of myth. They tell stories as well, and they tell stories for the same reasons that really I think all cultures tell stories, right? Myths have certain properties and certain value, and people communicate through story, for certain reasons, right? And those I think are, whatever culture you look at, I think those reasons are the same, right? People do things for the same reason. Other values and beliefs.
They believe that they have like a connection with the animal, like their ancestors, like a reason, or like.
Yeah, they have. So sometimes they think of certain animals as their distant ancestors, right? And I said, evolutionarily speaking, they're kind of right. But also they they have a relationship, they have a different relationship with animals than we do in the Western world, right? So I mentioned the other day in the Bible, God says, God creates the earth and the heavens. He creates all the animals and he puts them on the earth. And then he gives man dominion over the animals, right? So God says, okay, here's a bunch of animals, and you humans, you're in charge, right? You're at the top of the pyramid, right? But Indigenous people don't think about it that way. Indigenous people see themselves as kind of on the same level as the animals, right? We're all in this landscape. We're all trying to survive. We don't own the animals. We're not in charge of the animals. We're not better than the animals. We're in relationship with them, right? We depend on them for our survival. And so that's a different way of thinking about it, right? That's a more equal relationship than, the Bible setting out humans on the top, right? And so, think about how we might view the world differently if we saw animals as our equals, right? As if they were, in relationship with us rather than, resources for us to exploit and to use. Harry says here they value societal norms. True. Any culture would. That's true. And believe in supernatural things. They definitely do. Right. There are supernatural beings that exist in myth and religion for sure. Anything else?
Or from memories?
Yes. No. That's it. Okay. Last one, cultural expressions, dance, music, artwork.
They have a lot of artwork.
Yeah, right. Especially here on the West Coast, right? Very talented artists, right? Lots of carvings and costumes, woven baskets, woven blankets and hats, lots and lots of pretty amazing artwork, right? And again, Indigenous people in other parts of Canada are equally artistic and equally talented, but often because they didn't stay in one place for a long time, they didn't really have the ability to collect stuff, right? If you move all the time, you just can't have a lot of stuff with you. It's just impossible, right? But if you stay in the same place for a long period, you can have things, right? And so, yeah, they had things. And I think at the museum last week we saw that, the artwork is pretty incredible, right? Really lots of skill, and they really have their own kind of style, right? Their own sort of look. Arian says here they design dishes. Yeah, so we saw those big serving containers at the museum, which were pretty amazing. Yeah, lots of different masks and costumes, right? So again, ritual and ceremony in Indigenous culture is, part religious ceremony, but it also seems to be part performance, right? And so these people would do dances and act out stories, but with the full costume of the characters, right? So it's a really theatrical thing, and I don't know that any of the bigger religions today actually do such a thing, right? I'm thinking of like a Christian mass, and there's no real acting out of, well, maybe, sometimes at Christmas they'll do a little nativity play, right? Maybe that's the closest European comparison, where we kind of act out the birth of Jesus at Christmas. And so, Indigenous people here on the West Coast would have done that kind of thing, but all the time, right? They'd always act out the stories and the dances and with the costumes, and kind of cool. Anything else? It's still quite a bit. Yeah. All right. Awesome. So, yeah, good. Let's leave species indigenous people behind. Again, we've just scratched the surface of what we could learn about them. And of course, that's only sort of one group of cultures, never mind the rest of Canada and North America. You know, there's a lot to learn, but of course, in 13 weeks, you gotta, you know, you gotta stop somewhere. So we're gonna stop there. And we're gonna move on to Greece. Now, this will be the last civilization or the last kind of cultural area that we deal with because we are fresh out of time. You may know things about Greece already because it's quite popular, but also a lot of things from Greece inform the culture of the West. We've kind of inherited or borrowed or stolen quite a bit from ancient Greece in terms of their culture, in terms of their, sometimes in terms of their language, in terms of their architectural style and artistic style. We've kind of borrowed a lot of things or stolen a lot of things. And so some of the things that we see may be familiar, but again, they come to us from here, and we've kind of borrowed heavily from Greece and from Rome as well. And of course, the Romans stole from the Greeks quite heavily. Pardon me. Or plagiarized, if you will. But let's start looking at this. So, again, we'll pay attention to these things if we can as we go forward. The first thing I wanted to sort of tell you about Greece is that when we talk about ancient Greece, it's a different sort of geographical context than modern Greece. Okay, so modern Greece is a country. You know, I'm sure we've all seen it on the map. It's just a little bit east of Italy. But if you look at the ancient Greek world, it's a little different. Okay, so here you can see the sort of Greek peninsula here, kind of Greece proper, if you will, quote unquote, is that blue and kind of gray area. If you go north of that, you get into Macedonia, which was, the Greeks saw that as a different place with a kind of a different culture. But in kind of the first millennium BC, Greeks start to sail off around the Aegean Sea, you can see there, and they start to found colonies all through, all around the Aegean. And so the Greek world of, the ancient Greek world is not just the country of Greece that we know today, but it's also the area around it that we know as, much of which we know as Turkey, right? So what's labeled the Persian Empire in this map is actually Turkey today. But in the past, it was very heavily Greek. There was lots of Greek city-states over there. And so the Greek world was kind of that circular area around the Aegean. And I think, gosh, was it Herodotus or was it somewhere else? One ancient author said that, you know, the Greeks are sort of crouched around the Aegean like frogs around a pond. And so there, you can see there's this kind of circular area that makes up the Greek world in ancient Greece. Again, modern Greece is just that blue, gray, yellow kind of area for the most part. But ancient Greece was a little bit different. And you can see if you look really close in the blue and gray area, you'll see some of the bigger Greek cities that you may have heard of. Athens, for sure, still the capital of Greece. Sparta is in there. Argos, Corinth. What else is in there? There's Olympia, that's important. Delphi, you can see Delphi, that's an important place for the oracles. Epirus is there. Yeah, lots and lots of kind of the bigger name city-states most are found in that blue-gray area, okay? But again, it's just a slightly different geographic area than we're used to. Pardon me, just got a little something in my throat. It's not COVID, I swear, it's not COVID. Right, so before we move on, I've got some reading for you to do, and it talks a little bit about the environment, right? The geography and the topography, right? The vertical elevation differences in Greece, because those things are important to how Greece develops, right? Because most of the big civilizations we've seen in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in the Indus River Valley in India, in China on the Yangtze and on the Yellow Rivers, all of those are river valley civilizations, right? And they're all different, but they all grow up in a river valley. But Greece is going to be different. Greece is going to be kind of weird. And so I'll invite you to read those 3 pages, and then we'll see if we can talk about some of these kind of initial questions, okay? So, up 15 minutes. That'll take us past the end of class.
So, 14.
14.
Half an hour.
How about,
12 minutes.
I'm going to put 10 minutes on the clock,
5
and then we'll just see what we can answer after 10 minutes. Maybe just the first question. Okay?
We put 10 minutes. We only have 2 minutes left.
What's the point? Well, I don't know. I'm an optimist. That's the point. I'm optimistic, Felicia. Right. Okay. So, as Felicia predicted, we have no time left to do this. So, I will end it here, and then we'll pick this up tomorrow. Okay. So, online people, I'll see you tomorrow. Okay. So, have a good afternoon.